Hello and welcome to Thrive Live with Energy Incorporated. My name is Daryl Moak and I am your host today. My co-hosts Tawana and Raven are not able to be with me, and our assistant Aaron is out today for a family situation and preparing for holidays. So we are really excited that you're here with us. We have a very special guest with us today, Dr. Eric Scott, psychologist in the DC area, and also an international psychologist. He's working also sometimes in Norway and other places. So we are really glad that we could grab him today to have this really important conversation. We may have another guest join us just a little while, and if that happens, you'll get to meet all about her just shortly. Energy Incorporated exists as a nonprofit organization, and live this podcast is designed particularly to help us work on eliminating the stigma associated with mental health and substance use disorders, and also stigma around health disparities around our country and in our communities. We are lifting everyone up. We're working to eradicate poverty in our communities. And so we're here today to talk in a very special episode as we lead into 2022 holiday season. We're talking about depression, anxiety, suicide. So much is going on in the news lately. So many things have happened in regards to that and these conversations. And so many of our family and our friends and our community members are dying by their own hand, as well as by what's going on around them. And so we want to talk about that a little bit and lift it up. So again, welcome, Dr. Scott. It's good to have you with us today.
Glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and your practice and how you come to this, how you see this issue.
Well, like I said, I am a licensed psychologist in the District of Columbia, and I've been working in the field now for about 25 years now at this point. And my specialty is probably pediatrics for the most part, but I've also done the lifespan. And depression and anxiety, of course, are fields that we as psychologists meet every single day. And it's our job, hopefully, to be part of trying to do our best to be part of the healing that needs to happen in this, and maybe to explain how depression and anxiety is part of our lives, and how by dealing with difficulties in our lives, it can lead to things like, for instance, suicide. One of the things that led me to this whole field is, remember, every day in the United States, 125 people commit suicide. That's quite a few people. Every 11 and a half minutes, someone is doing this. It's a crisis in this country. And all we can do, bring awareness like you're doing here, Daryl, I think is fantastic, to really battle this really significant problem, which takes a whole village to combat.
Yeah, and we're going to visit this. I know that my co-host Tawana, as a social worker, is really into this subject, and so I know that she's going to want us to revisit this again because she's got some good points to make, and I want to honor her and her absence today, as well as our co-host Raven, who works in the substance use disorder area, and we'll have lots to talk about as well, because there are also people that are self-medicating and
Right.
using drugs or alcohol as a way of coping. And oftentimes during the season, we also will see an increase in overdoses and people dying as a result of substance use abuses. And some are suicide and some are not. But it really speaks to what's going on in our communities and how people are really struggling just to make it. Even in one of the most prosperous countries, so we say, in the world, we are still having people that are not making it. So, Dr. Scott, there's also during this time of year something that's called SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. Can you shed a little bit of light about what that is and how that plays itself out? And does that play a factor sometimes in suicide as well?
Oh, suicide is such a broad topic, you know what I mean? And so, but definitely, seasonal affective disorder is a thing. You know, a brain does respond to light and to daytime, and as it gets darker, our mood often darkens along with it. That is not uncommon. It's something we find quite a bit. Actually, a lot of studies show that in countries that have more darkness, things like here in Norway and in Finland, suicide rates definitely go up when it's dark 24 hours a day. Obviously, we're affected by that. But I also want to address the point you talked about in terms of substance abuse and about how people use substances as coping strategies. I think that's such an important point, you know, because you can say whatever you want about substance abuse, but it is maybe a poor coping strategy, but it is a coping strategy. I mean, go in and treat substance abuse disorders. It's important that we also discuss what are we trying to cope against. What function does the substance have for us that we can't deal with otherwise? I always say before you take away a coping strategy, make sure you have something else to replace it. To deal
Absolutely.
with life.
No, that's a
Otherwise, you
great
mess
point.
with the emotions and the feelings, and that could lead to many different things, as you well know.
Yeah, that's a great point that you make there, I think, because oftentimes we have the stigma against people that may be using substances as some sort of weakness, a weakness in their functioning, a weakness in their character, a character flaw, when in fact it may actually be that it is a coping strategy. We hear
Definitely a
all
coping
the time
strategy.
that we know people that will say, I have a glass of wine or a drink after work to help me unwind. That's a coping strategy, right? And the more that the one cup doesn't work, the one glass doesn't work, the one beer doesn't work, you need more and more to do it. And it just becomes the way of coping. The same thing as some folks that are using, we'll say medicinal marijuana, since
Let's
in
call
some
it that.
places it's medicinal.
Hmm.
But for recreational purposes, some people are using it not because they just don't have anything else to do, but they really are using it because it provides a relief for them that they are finding helpful. And
And
so I
also remember that nobody as a child says, you know what, when I get old, I can't wait to become an alcoholic. That is not something people want to become. What I'm
mm,
saying is that they use the coping strategies that are there for them and they're effective for them. And sometimes they may become too much. And sometimes it does become an illness and a disease, the coping strategy in and of itself. But remember, it always started as a coping strategy, and nobody as a young child is dreaming about being an outsider. No one's dreaming about becoming a substance abuse person. It is something, a path that you've gone along, and all of a sudden you are there. And then you have to deal with all the stigma around it as well, which is a horrible thing to deal with in addition to what you're dealing with otherwise in the day-to-day life. So empathy and understanding of substance abuse, empathy and understanding of it as a coping strategy, and really trying to help people find other coping strategies before you take away the first one. These discussions are really important to have. The criminalization of coping strategies I find very difficult as a psychologist to swallow.
can you talk a little bit more about the criminalization of those coping strategies? Because there have been movements and there are movements and ongoing movements of decriminalizing all drugs. And there's an argument that if you do decriminalize it, then you take away some of both the underground nature of it, the secretive nature of it, and also the abuses that happen from people in terms of sellers and buyers and all of that whole marketing, making a market out of it in that sense. But besides that, I think you're talking about something a little different in terms of criminalizing coping strategies. And can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Well, let's say against the we have a drug that is socially quote unquote accepted. We have alcohol, right? And
Mhm.
remember, about 100 years ago, what did we do? Well, we had prohibition. What happened during prohibition? Well, people bootleg, people drank anyway, and tons of people went to jail. Tons of people lost their livelihoods because they were through the bootlegging thing. That secret societies, people met to drink. Police came and raided it. You cannot tell me that that was a good way to deal with alcoholism. Actually, it was not. And actually, alcoholism became even more prevalent during those days because all of a sudden you had this whole secret society around alcohol that was not conducive. Better to put it into a different context, for instance, as we did after Prohibition. And what I'm saying is that if we have basically living in the just say no type of strategy is by definition prohibition, right? That's what it is. And
Mhm.
so, and by definition, the same thing happened. The same um, um, difficulties that we had in prohibition, meaning police state arrests, people going to jail, we're seeing now in the Just Say No society. And it has a significant impact on people's lives afterwards because if you are criminalized after that, how are you going to get a job? How are you going to get further education? How are you going to get an apartment? You know, which means even more of an outsider. And then how are you going and what type of coping strategies are going to deal with that? No one's happy when you can't get a job. No one's happy when you can't get an apartment. What's left? And then next thing you know, you have a whole cycle and circle that keeps going in one generation and also towards the next. So the criminalization part of it, in terms of drugs now, of drugs, the same way it has in terms of alcohol, is not a very effective way to deal with it at all. On the
Mhm.
contrary, they led to a lot of suffering and a lot of people. a lot of families across the board, women, men, and children. It's quite sad,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. So if you or someone you know is dealing with substance use disorder, dealing with depression, anxiety, or any other mental illness, mental health concern, please visit DBH. Information is down below. 1-887 We Help. It's available for you. 877 We Help. It is available for you. 8887 We Help. Sorry. It is available for you to use. Services are provided through the District of Columbia Department of Behavioral Health. And so if the ability to pay is not a concern, so the most important thing is that we get help. And DC has a model that we use, which is a harm reduction model. And we'll talk a little bit about harm reduction, but we're not asking people to just stop all together. We're asking people to do things that will help them be healthier along the way. And so ultimately, stopping may be a goal for that person. It may not be. But what we want you to do is to be healthy, whether you're using intravenous drugs, whether you're using anything else. We want you to be healthy. We want you to be safe. And we want you to get better, whatever that means for you, right?
That's
No
right.
judgment, no stigma. Getting better is what makes you your healthiest, your best self. And that's why we do Thrive Live, because we want you to do more than just survive. We want you to thrive. These are real situations, real people, real solutions, and that's what we're talking about today. So let's talk a little bit about these holidays, right? Joy to the world. Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah and Winter Solstice and Happy Kwanzaa, Merry Christmas, all these wonderful things that are going on, and people are, hark how the bells sing, da, 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 and we're singing and we're caroling and we're having our chocolate, we're visiting. There are trees and lights, so many lights, colors, and decorations, and cookies and cakes and pies and meals being prepared.
Yes,
Sound
Lord.
like wonderful times, right? But for some people, those times are not as wonderful. There are people for this time creates a high amount of anxiety. We don't talk as much about the anxiety part. We're going to get to the suicide and the depression part, but I do want to talk a little bit about the anxiety part that people are experiencing and how that can negatively impact people's lives as well. So, Dr. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about how anxiety may show up in people and what it looks like and what someone might do to deal with anxiety if they're beginning to feel that way?
Well, let's talk about anxiety to begin with. First of all, the antidote to anxiety in many ways is making the unknown known. If you understand what I'm saying.
Okay.
What makes people anxious is what's going to happen. What is the structure? What can I expect? If you don't know what that is, everybody becomes anxious. It's like a normal feeling. And inside of your body, you get these chemical reactions. Of course, you feel it. Like everybody knows what it is. It's that feeling of butterflies in the stomach. You cold sweat. You can't sleep. You can't get regulated. But it often doesn't come out of the blue. It often comes from something very specific, meaning what's going to happen? Where's my standing in this? What are the expectations? And we're going to meet those expectations. And the thoughts keep going around and around and around and around. Anxiety increases more and more and more. But oftentimes, the anxiety is the symptom of the problem, not necessarily the problem. It's telling you there's something going on that you don't have the coping strategies to deal with. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
Can you back up just a little bit, because you said something that was really powerful, I think, and want to make sure our listeners and our viewers later on will be able to see this. When you talked about anxiety, you talked about what are the outcomes or what are the expectations and can I meet them? And sometimes I would think during the holidays that people are worried about, do I have enough to do this? What happens if I buy all this stuff and I have this bill later on? And they're worried about that. But there's also this fear of disappointing people if you don't get them gifts or don't get things for people or don't do things for people. You can't have the big meal that you normally would like to have. You feel embarrassed and feel like people are going to judge you or feel like you're going to be less liked by people. So people put themselves out to spend lots and lots of money, running up credit cards, using money that they may not really have to buy things for people especially for children. It's really hard. I had
Mhm.
conversations with people just last week who were worried about wanting to do things for people's children. And I said, well, I know that Christmas is a big deal for folks, but in your community, why don't you do a Kwanzaa type of event, and that allows you to have a community gathering, and then you can give things to young people. We give them, they're called zawadi, or those are the gifts that we give out, educational learning types of things that everyone, all the kids can get something, but this, it takes some of the pressure off of having to give them a bunch of gifts for Christmas, as
Mhm.
opposed a book, a writing something to write, a coloring book, a drawing book, something creative, something interesting that they can all get, that you can do a little differently. It takes some of that pressure off of, we got to do this for Christmas because the kids are going to be sad if they don't get Christmas. We have to teach people what Christmas may really be about, but also, even if it's secular, for many of you who are not in a spiritual path and it may be a secular Christmas, that's okay. But what does it really mean about this togetherness, unity, community, differently than it's about being giving gifts and buying stuff, right? Doc, how would you talk to people about undoing some of that level of anxiety that they may be experiencing?
Well, one thing, of course, is the materialistic part of it. Something else is, let's say you are a person who's struggling with substance abuse. You're going to meet people. Are they going to like me? Are they going to remind me of my greatest hits, what I did last year? Is this party going to go well? Am I being able to make it through? Will these presents make it such that this will become easier for me? Are all the previous things that happened this last year, is that forgotten or not? What about the discussions that are happening? I mean, there's so many things that run around in your brain, in addition to poverty, in addition to money. You know, one of the things about making the unknown known is that I so agree with you what you say. You're trying to make it, that party, known. This is what we're going to do. This is what's going to happen. We're going to do books for kids. We're going to do that way. You're trying to make the day itself as predictable as possible. The more predictable the day is, the less anxiety you get. The more unpredictable the day is, the more anxiety you get. Is what I'm trying to get at. Because before that, if you think that, well, money and presents is the way to go, you're ruminating about that. You're worrying about that. But it's so much more than a presence. It's about this. Am I going to be accepted there in this family? Am I going to be forgiven if I have a substance abuse disorder? Uh, will people believe that I'm going to show up? If I show up, am I going to be able? I think I'm going to behave, or will I be able to be seen that way? I mean, there's so many ideas going through your mind. All of these things, of course, lead to anxiety, and I would say that that is a normal reaction. I would be more concerned about the person who's not anxious about that. If you understand what I'm trying to say, that's unusual, you know. So take the anxiety as a signal that there's something out here. There's a concrete problem, whatever that problem is, defining the Christmas day, for instance, that needs to be solved. And once you have solved that problem, we decrease the anxiety. Anxiety is a symptom of something. It's not the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. It's the way it's manifesting. It's telling you something is going on here that's out of my control, and need to find ways to bring it within my control in a way that is functional for myself and for the people around me. And that's an individual discussion from person to person, family to family, place to place, time to time. You know what I mean? It's and on that specific level. But that's what anxiety is.
Now, is that true also then for depression? Is depression also a symptom of something else, or are there other ways that depression shows up differently in our lives, in our body, in our mental health than anxiety? Are they very similar in some ways?
Now, there's so many different things of depression. I will say one thing, and that is that typically, and maybe it's easier to explain in terms of with kids and children, for instance. I would say that in anyone who's in a situation where the demands of the situation exceeds your coping strategies to deal with those demands, if you're in that situation long enough, everybody will be depressed. Everybody will be anxious. My point. For instance, as grown-ups, if we had if back let's backtrack. Let's say that you're a kid in a school and all of a sudden the people in the school are talking Albanian for 6 hours a day. It'd be odd to me. In the beginning, I can imagine you'll say, wait a minute, you're talking Albanian, so you holler, you scream, you whatever you want to do, but you are still talking Albanian, even though you're hollering and screaming. After 3 years, you say to yourself, you know what? I hollered, I screamed, I threw stuff. No one's listening to me really anyway. So what happens then? Well, you get this kind of like, well, I guess I gotta sit here and listen to Albanian for 6 hours a day. And all of a sudden you feel dumb and you feel stupid. You feel like there's nothing I can do to change the situation. And if that is school, if that is learning, if that is a job that I can't handle, if that is a relationship I can handle, over time you deal with something that we call for learned helplessness, right? You have no control over your life. You have no control of the situation. Things are not getting better. I try and nothing's getting better. And when you get in that situation, get into learned helplessness, by default, that is a very deep form of depression. It just is. And that is actually a normal reaction over time. You don't see it in humans, you actually see it in animals too. I mean, you all know in animal studies, if a dog gets shocked, and first they try to jump away from the shock if they can, but if the shock is continuous and there's nothing the dog can do, guess what? They lay on top of that buzzer and just lay there. There's nothing they can do. And that is a physiological reaction to an uncontrollable event. And in many ways, I find depression to be that, and that is that the situation is so huge. The problem is so big. And no matter what I do, no matter what I say, things, in my opinion, do not improve. And over time, that leads to significant depression. It just does.
So, Dr. Scott, can children be really depressed, or is that just something that they pick up from the adults around them and they're not really depressed? Are they too young to understand, have depression? Can children really have depression?
Dogs can be depressed. Of course they can. You know what I mean? And so I can, if I wanted to, if I had full control over your life, and I define the demands I'm going to place on you. If I had that, I can make you depressed and anxious within 2 weeks, no problem. No, because what I'm saying is the mechanism of that is that if I place a demand and expectations of you that you can never meet, and you can never meet them, the natural reaction to that is anxiety and depression. Is what I'm trying to get at. And so in a child's life, for instance, let's say you see it a lot with kids with, let's say, a learning disability of some kind or whatever. But if you find that you try hard, things are not put in a place where you can understand them, things become ununderstandable to you, what happens over time? I mean, what happens with, and this is what kids say. They say, first they say, I'm smart. They're going to school with all kinds of energy, I can do this. They go to the school, they find out that these people can do the things, I can't do them. And over time, your parents say, well, you're smart, but you go to school, but I'm not that smart. And over time, you'll say to yourself, well, maybe I'm not smart. Maybe I am stupid. And you believe that, is my point. And then you internalize that, even though it's not necessarily true. And that leads to depression and anxiety is what we're trying to get at. And let's say that now you're grown up, you're in your 40s and your 50s, and you don't have the career you thought you're going to have. You don't have the house that you thought you're going to have. You don't have a position in the family you thought you're going to have. You know what I mean? And that in itself can be this kind of like hopelessness. If you go and get into that space, then depression follows. So then the question is, what do we do about that? You know what I mean? Well, the one thing is to say you take away depression, but the real problem is connectedness, belief in the future, hope. How do we reinstall that in the community? Well, you do that by having people you can talk to who will listen to you, who will accept you for who you are, build you step for step moving forward, building that trust that maybe you have lost because you tried to interact with the world before, but you haven't really met that understanding before, that space of understanding before, not just from your therapist, but really from your local community. And how do you build those connections to combat that? And that could be through the church, that could be through through their bullying lead, that can be through. But what's happening is that we have this life of isolation by yourself, and over time that leads to even more hopelessness. You know what I'm saying? And then there's a vicious circle that goes around and around and around, and you're left with a coping strategy, which may be drugs and alcohol, for instance, which is not an unusual place to go. Actually,
or over shopping.
I totally get it. I totally understand how people can think that way. I totally get it.
And you can make it worse. You can overshop because, well, I'm just gonna buy everything, and you totally lose abandon at that point, right? Or you overeat,
That's right.
or you overwork. You're gonna work harder and harder, work more and more hours, later and later, get less sleep because I need to make more money to do more stuff, to do, all of those things. All of those continue to feed into this idea of anxiety and leading to greater and greater rounds of depression when it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work, right? Ultimately. And so children can we talked about children becoming depressed. We talked about adults being depressed. So do elders and seniors have anything in this world to be depressed about? They have lived a long life. They're 70, 80, 90, 100 years old. What the heck would they need to be depressed about? They had a great life, hopefully, right? And they've seen children and grandchildren. If they've had them, they've had great careers. They're living in a senior center somewhere, or maybe they're still in home or whatever. But what could they possibly have to be depressed about?
You ain't talk like this to the elderly, are you? They're gonna beat your ass if you talk to them. So no, I mean, like I said, it's so individual from person to person. You know what I mean? And so, but I will say, which is kind of good. This podcast is such a great thing. The fact that we can talk about it is so important. Many people think that I'm the only one that feels this way, or not that I'm the only person that's depressed, but I'm the only person that's depressed like this. And the fact that we can be open about it and talk about it, and maybe you can say that, well, not necessarily that depression is an illness or anxiety is an illness, but in many ways it's a natural reaction to a difficult circumstances. And in some ways, it'd be weird if you didn't feel depressed or anxious given these circumstances. So what you can do about these circumstances to alleviate the anxiety and depression, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Because otherwise, back in a totally different subject, you know what I mean? But one of the things that I thought myself when I did my dissertation a long time ago, I did it on anger management, and I did it on in domestic violence. I did it on men who abuse their partners. And I thought that giving them a 10, 12-week anger management class, because they need to deal with their anger, that would lead to less domestic violence. Guess what? It didn't work that way. The anger is a manifestation of something else. Just controlling the anger, it does not resolve the issues of attachment and relationships and those issues, if you see what I'm getting. It's a symptom of a problem. And I think the same thing's happening with anxiety and depression. It's a symptom of something else. What is that something else? What is driving these feelings of hopelessness? What is driving these feelings of worry for you in your life? What are the concrete issues that are going on in your life that we can help you solve and make better? And through that, not necessarily get rid of anxiety and depression. I don't know if we can live a life without anxiety and depression, but how can we learn to live with anxiety and depression in a functional way over time? Because the expectation is that's going to vanish for most people. I don't know anybody who has life without it. I think we all have some aspects of it. It is how can we learn to live with it in a manner that is as functional as it can be. Not how we can make life easy, but how we can make life easier.
So what I hear you saying is that there are people, all of us, probably at some point in our lives, over times, often and recurrently, will have a bit of anxiety, maybe a bit of depression. We find ways to manage or deal with the situation that leads to it, and we move through it, right? And so the harder it is to move through it, the harder it is to come out of it, right? So the more stuff that's happening that you can't solve, that you don't have the answers to, that you can't see a way out of, leads to more anxiety or more depression. Yeah, that's what I hear you saying.
But I am saying though, like you can work through it if you can't work through it. But let's say that you have a criminal record, and let's say that you have a substance abuse disorder, for instance. Well, the issue is you can't get a good job to get your finances in order. You can't get a good apartment. Those things are real regardless.
So because those things are real,
Huh? That's real life, man. That's real life.
Yeah.
Real life. And it doesn't. You get 55,000 hours of therapy, but if you can't get a job and you can't get a housing, what the hell? You know what I'm saying? What?
Right.
So
I brought that up because I wanted to point out so that anyone that's watching here, that if you haven't really felt depression in a major way, you haven't really felt heavy duty anxiety, the point is that we all have it, right? We have some
That's
of
right.
it. If you are driving down the street and you almost have an accident, that initial adrenaline rush would be the equivalent of a form of anxiety, like
Yes.
that shock really quick. But you manage it because, the accident didn't happen, right? But for the person where the accident did happen, they may constantly find themselves, excuse me, being anxious every time something similar comes up. If something happened on a bridge, every time they get ready to go over a bridge, they're a little nervous about the bridge, right? About being on a bridge. As an example, and I'm saying that because I want to help normalize this idea that we all have some forms of depression and anxiety in our lives. That's normal.
It is.
So that we don't have to judge other people that are struggling with depression and anxiety. They're just having a harder time getting to the place of resolution about the thing that may be leading to anxiety or depression.
That's so correct. That's exactly what I'm trying to say. You know what I mean? And that is that. And the other thing I have to think about as well is that and those of us who are not struggling with depression. I mean, I'm talking about serious depression, not real depression. You know, because what the people who have real depression say is, well, no one wants to visit me, no one spend time with me. But I also would say that people who don't have depression, who visit people who are depressed, it is hard to be around people with depression. And actually, people, when I say people, they're actually right in many ways. We have to have empathy with people with depression, the way we have with other things. You know, it is hard to be with someone who's in that dark place, because we also feel that lack of control. Also, how can we make this better fast? You know, I mean, we make it better quickly, but if the circumstances are chronic and long term, I would also say that getting out of it can also be chronic and long term, or it could be, like I said before, maybe because of trauma history or because of whatever things we bring with us in life. How can I learn to live my best life with these circumstances that I have right now? How can I be accepted as the person that I am right now? Without because the expectation of it, I have to smile and be happy, is also driving depression in people. You know what I mean? Because I can't meet that. How people are really, really, really depressed. So how to meet people where they are, meet them with love, open, and understanding. Let people work through the process, just like you're saying, and also not to say, well, get over it, which for some people is just not. It's so difficult.
It's a work through. It's not a get over. It's a work through. It's a process through. It's a live through. Some things are living with. We have to sometimes live with the limitations of what our circumstances may be, and learning to adjust and adapt to that, so that we can continue to thrive versus just survive, right?
You said it in a nutshell right there.
And there's one other thing. So just because I know there will be people that will watch this and say, you all talked about situational stuff, right? There are situations where there is a chemical imbalance in our lives, in our brains, and our bodies, that leads to a clinical diagnosis of depression or anxiety that comes from a biological issue that we have. And so those folks tend to need some sort of medication that will help them to regulate their body, their serotonin and other levels of adrenaline and things that are in their body that their body's not naturally isn't regulating. And so there is that kind of depression. Can you speak a little bit to that? And can you tell the differences between someone that has a biological predisposition to depression or anxiety versus someone who's situational? Are there things that we can see differently in those kinds of depressions or anxieties?
I think that but your sound quality is kind of breaking up a little bit, just so you know, from my end. But
okay.
What I will say is that I think that in the moment, that you're feeling. Let's say that it's a Wednesday at 10:30 p.m. Okay, and you're feeling depressed for whatever reason, be it situational or chronic. I think the feeling itself for both people at 10:30 p.m. that specific minute is not all that different. The difference probably is that for the situational person, maybe at some point it will move. It could be grief, for instance. It could be whatever. That can be. I have lost a job. I could be, but it still hurts. You know what I mean? It still is not a feeling we want to have. But back to your other question about there are genetic components to depression, no doubt about that. You know what I mean? Just as it is in bipolar disorder, as it is with many other psychiatric disorders. And of course, we want to have the medical professions to be there. But remember, even if you're well medicated, you're still dealing with situations in daily life that medicines can help you with. Like, do I have good income? Do I have secure housing? You know what I mean? Do I have good relationships with my family members? That's regardless of medication or not. You know, and so medication can make you able to maybe be capable of entering in those discussions. But when you are in a situation, you have difficulty with housing, difficult with job, then it doesn't matter if maybe situational or chronic. That's still going to be difficult, and that's still going to drive for everyone. Food security is a huge thing, of course, as well. You know what I mean? If you're dealing with that, it's complicated, and then even met with, like you said, with empathy, understanding. You know what I mean? And then discussion not only about how you're feeling, but also what are you thinking? You know what I mean? And then and how what can we do specifically in day-to-day life to make your life better? Is what I'm trying to get at. You know, so it's a
So,
combination of all the above.
so one of the things that we want to make sure we do is remind you that when someone, whether it's yourself or someone else, is dealing with depression or anxiety, that the one thing we don't want to do is judge it.
No, that's
We
right.
always know the reasons why. And sometimes the reasons why may not be solvable in the immediate moment. What we need, as Dr. Scott has said, is empathy, understanding, an extension of grace and love to that person to give them some space. I'm hearing the little crackling too. I'm not sure why it's crackling, but so we want to make sure that we're taking the time to be kind and to be supportive of people versus judging them and saying, "Oh, get over it. Your mom died 20 years ago." You know, that you can't. We can't put a time limit on grieving, and also things reoccur. A memory, a thought, a feeling, a milestone in your life or their lives may be different for them, and the memory of someone who's not there to share it with them is different in that time. And it may not have mattered last year when you turned 54. I turned 54 this year. May not have mattered if when you turned 54, but when you turn 60, it might be a different thing that, oh, my grandma's not here, right? And 6 years ago, it didn't have the same impact as it does now. And it might not hit again until 75 when you're the same age as someone else who you really loved. And when they made their transition, you're realizing I'm the age they were. Is it going to happen to me this year? Well, you know, there are lots of thoughts that may come up, and we never know. And I see our other guest is coming in. I'm going to add her into the stream and talk with her in just a moment. Hello, Sandra.
Hello. How are you?
We're good. So glad to have you with us. We were just talking a little bit more about, we've been talking about anxiety and depression, and also talking about not judging people, and understanding that their situations may be different and why something comes up for them at one point in their life when it may not come up at another time. Chandra, our other guest, I'm so excited to have her with us, and I'll introduce her for a quick second. And Chandra, we have Dr. Eric Scott on with us today, and he's been talking with us about, he's a psychologist and talking about anxiety and depression and the circumstances that lead to them, how we deal with it. We've been talking about grace and support and empathy for people, and unpacking what different ways that depression and anxiety show up. Chandra is
if I may say.
Sanahara Ama is Sanahama Ama Chandra is a nurse practitioner, an
Not
RN
yet. Not
in,
yet.
not yet, she's an RN, I'm sorry, registered nurse in the Maryland area. She also is a spiritual holistic practitioner. And so we are excited because we're going to talk with her a little bit about what we can do with our bodies and our eating and things like that deal when we're having anxiety and depression, and things that may help us out a little bit more. And we're going to get into this conversation briefly before we close out about suicide, how we can support our community, and how we can address this. At the bottom of the screen, you can see there the suicide hotlines 988, as well as 988hotline.com, and the 800 number that you can call if you're having suicidal thoughts or feelings, or someone you know is having those thoughts or those feelings, or you suspect that for them. There's a way to get people help. But Ama, it is so good to have you with us today. Can you share a little bit of your insight and wisdom around anxiety, depression, or even suicide in your practice, and what you would encourage people to do to deal with those situations?
Thank you so much, first of all, for coming. It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Eric Scott. It's a pleasure to be here with you again, Daryl. I just love you. I told you I was thinking about you, and then we connected. I love how those kinds of things connect, how the connections just work even in the ethers, right, in the spirit realm. But what I want to say about this topic, it is so necessary. Most of us don't have a lot of awareness, but we experience these things. So I'm hopeful you can hear me. My son is actually on with his therapist in the other room, and so I have to come in my room to give him privacy. And I don't have really bright lights, so apologize to the viewers. I'm sorry, y'all, that I'm kind of in the dark, but it's okay. So what comes up for me is when we talk about this idea, and what we need to begin to understand is that anxiety, depression, all of these are part of the human collective experience that we're all journeying through. You're not alone. You're not strange. There's nothing wrong. Well, you're moving through we're all moving through something that has built-in dysfunction in it. And so we often begin to personalize that. And the more we personalize on it, there's this idea that says energy goes where our energy flows where attention goes. So we begin to hyperfixate at times on these things, and that anxiety can show up at times. That depression is actually on the other side of that, like that you can go between them. And I believe that the depression can show up as a part of exhaustion. You don't even know how I'm going to get out from underneath these pressures and stresses. And so I'm seeing it a lot. I'm supporting a lot of people with it. And that support for me, or what I'm really noticing, is that there is a need for people to have a few things that they can hold on to. Some anchoring points, some ways to kind of drop in and get familiar with their body. The self-talk, unhealthy self-talk is a big part of it. We get into these loops. So finding ways and things to take you off the loop. When we're talking about practices that allow you to settle or get into your body, that's going to be different for everyone. With weather, we're also dealing with the fact that here in the north, we got less sunlight. So having that decrease in sunlight, that cold weather that makes us stay in, we're missing out on one of our biggest feel-good tools, which is just being outside in the warmth and the heat and the sun. I know some people do not like it hot, but they still benefit from vitamin D. And people in melanated skin need vitamin D at much higher rates than people who are non-melanated skin are really able to absorb what they need from the sun. We don't get to absorb what we need from the sun at the same level because of our melanin. We need high amounts of that. And we are chronically low and are deficient in vitamin C. African Americans have the highest rates of deficiency in vitamin D, which is going to lead us to having more well, not only will it cause us to be more depressed, or we don't have that feel good that can come just from having that vitamin D, it also makes us more sick. We're at greater risk for having sickness or feeling dis-ease just from not having that vitamin D. We have a lot of, and as we were talking about, when we start getting into the loops and the mental thoughts, I work with a lot of people. This is when they're missing their loved ones. They're missing their loved ones. They feel pressure to take care of their family or their responsibilities. People are going into debt, trying to keep up with appearances. So all of these are things that I'm trying to give people permission. A lot of my people, I'm giving them permission to say, to be honest and tell themselves the truth. There's a relationship between awareness and fear that most people don't allow themselves to explore. And that fear is something that is where we don't even want to see it because we're too afraid of it. So we try to hide our eyes, and that's when it starts doing all kinds of things. It grows, it morphs, it becomes anything. But when we can take a look at it, get with a professional, a trusted friend, a journal, any of those things that can allow you to begin to process your thoughts and maybe get you out of some of those loops, can be very helpful. But it's a very tough season, very tough season. On my page, I do a lot of work to support people in this season through sound. I do a lot with song and sound. I do a lot in terms of having messages and just kind of sharing things. I create a safe space. So we talked about wishing people, asking children about Christmas and asking children about what did you get for Christmas? And it opened up this amazing conversation where all of these parents said, oh my gosh, I feel so much pressure. Every time people ask me this or ask my children this. And so it gave them a safe space to come out of fear and into awareness of what that experience was, so we can name the thing, we can name the harm. It's no longer a boogeyman. It's true. It is pressure. Societal pressure. We end up parenting for other people, or you feel bad for other people because you're not where everyone else is. So those are some of the things that are kind of coming up. And again, just wanting to be gentle and be available for my folks who are mourning, in deep mourning right now. So sharing a lot of resources that help you understand that love, sometimes we feel these feelings because that connection doesn't have a place to plug in. Where does my love keep going? And you have all of these feelings. So we can process that with someone professionally if we need it. And I will ask a person in a minute. I will ask in a minute, how are you safe? Are you feeling safe now? Are you feeling unsafe? And it becomes a situation where that becomes an easy conversation to engage in with people at no judgment. Just let's talk about this, because it's very normal for us all to be feeling these things. So this is some of what I would like to share, at least right now. I know we don't have a lot of time and I'm just kind of running, but I'll pause there. Am I giving you what you asked for, Daryl? Are we in harmonic here?
Listen, you are giving us some good stuff to work on. I'm going to ask Dr. Eric to jump in on, to add to some of what you said. But it's great. And I think that the goal here is that this is the beginning of many conversations. But I wanted to do one today because of the holidays and wanted to have something out there for people. If they're on Facebook, if they're on YouTube, if they come across this by searching for things that have anything related to what we're talking about in here in the search engine, that they'll get something that will be helpful for them in this moment today. Because that's the goal, is that as we work to eliminate the stigma associated with mental illness, substance use or disorders, and all of these things, the poverty that people are experiencing, being able to be free. I love, Amma, that you talked about giving people permission and inviting people. My daughter, and Dr. Eric, you were talking earlier, and I was going to say this, my daughter she's 5, she'll be 6 in February, and she's been asking, the other day we're driving home, she goes, how come we don't have, because normally I put up the lights for her and I surprise her. One day she goes away and she comes back and the lights are up. And she goes away in the daytime. There are no lights up. There's no snow, nothing. There's nothing there. And she comes home. It's dark, and the lights are, everything's on. And she comes up to her house like, wow. And I've been doing that for her for years now. And so that's going to happen today or tomorrow. But she was noticing that she was, how come we don't have the lights that we have our next door neighbor? And one of our neighbors across the street, Miss Rudy, has her yard full of things. So we don't have it up there. I said, well, everyone does it differently, and different people have lights up, and everyone doesn't always have it. We're going to have ours up as well. But she hasn't been overly concerned about that. She hasn't been overly concerned about Christmas as a getting a gift thing. She has asked for things that she's wanted, but she does that every day. But it hasn't been over it. What I've been trying to instill in her is that Christmas is not always just about what you're going to get, but about what we do together, about our time together, about doing things with community and doing things in the world that are kind and that are good, that we do all year long, but particularly we focus on at this time of the year. So I'm also going to work with her on getting rid of some things in her room now that she can gift out, because new things will be coming in. And so making room for that and sharing her blessings with other people. Parenting is no joke. But so I do think that we have to work on, I want to eliminate or reduce the stress. I noticed that she's been acting out a little bit more in the, and it dawned on me that it could be this idea about Christmas is coming and what happens around her around this idea of Christmas, and that may be adding to her behavioral things. So I'm working to, and I'm saying this to other parents that are out there, sometimes what our children may be going through, they only know how to express it in certain ways. And so it may not be what we think it is, because we're the adults and we logically think you're doing this behavior that we don't want you to do, and it's because of X, Y, and Z, when it could be an entirely different reason. So it's a time to talk to our children, to understand that our children can have depression, they can have sadness. They're especially when they're not gonna. My daughter loves going to school. She's gonna be out of school for about 2.5 weeks, and so when will she see her friends again? Will she see them again? For a 5-year-old, that's a lot of time not to be around people that you're around almost every day, right? So think about that as we're talking to our children. They can have depression. They do have anxieties. Our teenagers have lots of anxiety and lots of depression. I remember as a teen hearing people say, well, you teenagers don't have anything to worry about. You don't have, everything's done for you. And that's just so, we discredit what our children are experiencing every day. In that way. And the same way I made a joke earlier to Dr. Scott about elders have nothing to be depressed about. They've had a wonderful, marvelous life. What could they possibly have to be depressed about? I was joking when I said that earlier. In order to just sort of draw the attention that all of us at every stage of life have reasons to have some degree of depression or anxiety. Something's going on for us. And the community, we need the community around us to lift that up. I'm going to pause there for a second. I'm going to invite you to think about, as we get ready to close out, some things that we can help people see. If there are things they could see in terms of people that may be suicidal? Are there signs that they can see? Or if not, how can we be helpful to people? How can we reach out to them? And while you all are thinking about that, I just want to lift up some names and some people to help us think about this. Most recently, we have heard Meghan Markle talk about being suicidal or thinking that way, having very dark thoughts at times within when she married into the royal family and the circumstances that she was going through, that they were going through. How much of that is all of their story, or part of their story, isn't for me to judge, but she's told us that she had some very serious feelings. We also know that Princess Diana talked about some of those same kinds of feelings of depression and sadness and the overwhelming nature of being in the spotlight. A lot of artists have talked about it. There's a young man recently I saw on Facebook. He was drafted number 2 a couple years ago into the NBA. He's 22 years old, I believe, and he's retiring after just 2 years. He says, I can't handle the pressure, the anxiety of trying to be, without all that pressure that he has to try to live up to an expectation when you have been drafted into the NBA and you're getting millions of dollars to perform at a certain level and to get to that level. So he's retiring because he stopped loving it, right? And some people will keep doing it. I'm hopeful, if he's really talented and really good, what I hope is that he will take a break get some counseling, set better realistic expectations for himself, and go back into the thing that he loved that's paying him really well, go back, be able to go back and enjoy that. But if it's not for him, it's great that he's learning it before something else happened. But we have some people, Stephen Twitch Boss, an American freestyle hip hop dancer, choreographer, actor, television producer, DJ, television personality, a loving husband and father, died after spent 24 hours before he died with his family, posting dance videos of him and his wife and things with his children. Unexpected, right? Unexpected. Jason Flatt, a normal high school athlete. He was a good all-American boy who was willing to work. What Jason's story reveals is a frightening truth. Seemingly well-adjusted teenagers, particularly boys who may see few emotional outlets for their pain, may simply need access to a gun, and a single traumatic event can trigger a self-destructive impulse. Jason David Frank. Jason was an actor and mixed martial artist, most known for his role as Tommy Oliver in Power Rangers. He was a believer in Christ and an advocate for children, and yet committed suicide. Nigel Shelby. Now, I talk about Nigel. I feel like Nigel was not my child. When I heard about Nigel, I felt an immediate parental thing towards him. He was an Alabama teen who had been described as being full of light, tragically took his own life after constant homophobic bullying. Chester Bennington. Chester was an American singer and songwriter who was best known as the lead vocalist in the rock band Linkin Park. We remember Robin Williams. Robin was an American actor and comedian known for his improvisational skills. Amazing artist. A wide variety of characters that he created in the spur of the moment and portrayed on film and dramas and comedies. He is regarded as one of the greatest comedians of all time. Elizabeth Miller, 66, a kind and gracious woman, died April 26, 2012. She was a mother to Lisa Marie Trujillo Lindstrom and Laura K. Trujillo Faherty. She was wife to Dick Miller, the daughter of Ellen Metcalfe, sister of Kathy Palmer and Patrick Kendrick, and aunt to many. She had many more friends than we knew, and perhaps in her fondest role, she was a grandmother to 8. She they found her in the Grand Canyon. And Ashanti Davis, a fifth grader at Sunrise Elementary in Aurora, Colorado, hung herself after the video was posted on a video social network, Musically, and she died Wednesday after spending 2 weeks on life support. And years ago, my friend Damon Wenham, dancer, tap dancer, he was in the movie Ragtime. He had a rising career as a dance and artist and performer, committed suicide. And the story that I heard, and I studied and danced with him, Damon was a few years older than I, and he taught us in my classes, my tap class in Los Angeles as a teenager rather. And Damon gave away all of his stuff. He rode a bike. He gave the bike away. He gave tap shoes away. He started giving away things that were important to him, and no one saw the signs. And so Damon is the inspiration for a poem that I wrote. It's called Screaming in the Night. And I'm not going to share that today, but another time I will share that poem. But I invite people to, one of the lines of the poem says, and you're trying to figure out what's happening, what's going on with someone. If you listen, you can hear because of the screaming in the night. And usually what that is a metaphor to is screaming while silent. It is screaming in the night. In the nighttime, no one is with you. No one hears you, but people are screaming, right? They're screaming with their behavior. They're screaming with the things that are going on around them. And I want to encourage people to pay attention to our friends and families, to take a moment out of the busyness of this holiday season or any time in our lives and see what we can see, but see what's not always being shown, to see beyond what's obvious, and to reach out to people, to talk to them, to pay attention to the children that are being bullied. It's not just get over it. It's not just telling them you're stronger than that, don't worry about it, right? Because they worry about it every day, because you're not with them when they go back to that school or walk that pathway between home and catch the bus or whatever they're doing to get there, right? We're not there. And it is real for our friends and our family. It was real for Twitch. It was real for Robin. It was real for Nigel. It was real for Elizabeth. It has been real for many, many people. And as Dr. Eric told us in the beginning of today's podcast, 125, is it, Dr. Eric? People commit in the United States commit suicide every day. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of people in a year. And those are the people that succeeded. What'd you say, Doc?
I said 1 every 11 and a half minutes.
Wow.
1 every 11 and a half minutes.
11 and a half minutes.
Yeah.
Imagine those are the ones that succeed. There are more trying, attempting.
That's right. These are the ones that
And so, say again, Doc.
These are the ones that have succeeded in committing suicide. One every 11 and a half minutes. Meaning a whole lot more that thought about it, a whole lot more that considering it.
Yeah.
I do have to wrap up soon for myself to get offline, but I do want to say a little bit about suicide, and that is that just please, if you are thinking about that, remember there is help out there. Please take note of the banners underneath there, the suicide hotline. Please call and reach out. One of the things that people have about suicide is a couple of things. One is there are people who do plan it out and give the things away in advance, like you talked about before, like your friend did. But there are also people, if you talk to people who try to commit suicide, at least the people that try to commit it, what they all say is, at least in my practice, is how quickly the thought came.
Yes.
And how fast they implemented the plan. Like quick. Like the idea came in their mind, and 10 minutes later, they're there with a noose around their neck. That fast. And I think we need to be aware of that. That these things sometimes they're planned, sometimes they happen really quickly. And they also describe it as kind of like a coldness to it, like this is a problem to be solved, kind of a thing. There's so many things in my life there is no control about, but I can't control this. And it goes fast. So if someone is telling you, you know what I mean, that they're feeling suicidal, please be there for that person. Tell the person that there is actually help out there. Maybe at the time when you're in a dark space, knowing that it's better on the other side is so far away, but it is the truth. There is another day. And also, some people have tried to commit suicide. Some of them have actually tried it before. People do multiple types of attempts. And sometimes it could be that they can remember that, you know what, I made that attempt, but I actually had 2-3 months of whatever the 2-3 months were. Maybe some good experiences, maybe some or tolerable experiences. But never doubt someone if they say that I feel that I want to do this. Take them seriously, be there for that person, and help that person get the help that they need and require. And show as much kindness and empathy as you possibly can. It's scary for them when we hear it, but to be there and find your inner strength and prayer, whatever it takes for you to be there and help that person through.
And Alma, we're going to come back again and have you back on, and we're going to talk to you and maybe Dr. Scott, if you're willing to come back again. And we'll talk about what things we can do to be healthy, what foods we can eat, what practices we can do, what are the things on a regular basis that help us to be our best self, our healthiest self. Are there things that we should eat more of or eat less of? If you're starting to feel sad or anxious or depressed, maybe we need to stay away from the carbs and the sugars because they pick you up and drop you. Maybe there's something to that. I don't know. But we can come back and we'll plan to talk more about this subject matter, about how do we eat ourselves to health versus eating ourselves to unhealthiness, right?
I would love that.
And Doc, maybe you'll come and talk to us about how do we think ourselves to health versus thinking ourselves into unhealthiness, right? And so what are the ways that we can use psychology and use medicine and use holistic practices to be better in our communities, and to remember that, as Amma said earlier, and Dr. Scott, you said this too, what we are experiencing is that we're experiencing in a community, in our families. And so our community can be a community that has depression in the community because of our circumstances, that we're all living in a depressed area, in a depressed environment, and we're all going through something that is difficult at this time. And so it's hard to see yourselves differently. So to know that there is help out there, that there is work for you. The suicide hotlines are there. The DBH hotline, again, 1-888-7-WE-HELP is another number that you can reach out to if you need to get immediate help for either a mental health or a substance use disorder concern. Again, we are Energy Inc. You can reach out to us at energyincorporated.org, and you can reach out to us. Our team, our staff are available to give you some referrals, to share with you, to help redirect you. I want to give, again, honor to my co-hosts who are not with me today, Tawana Lee and Raven Luckett, who work with us as well, and to Aaron, who is not able to be with us, our assistant today. But to all of you, thank you, Dr. Scott. Thank you, Amma, for being here and for sharing your wisdom and your work and your passion for people with us every day in every way. We want you to thrive. So join us again on Thrive Live. Real people, real situations, real solutions. Thanks for joining us today. Thank you, Dr. Scott. Thank you, Sanahanda, Amma, Chandra. Thank you for your gift of who you are. And happy holidays to everyone. As best as you can get them, and Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Winter Solstice, Happy Rama to you, to whatever you may celebrate or nothing. We hope that you will find some joy, some peace, some opportunity to be with others in community in this time of the year, to continue to build what we can build to make all of our communities healthy and happy again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a nice night.